Earlier this week, Jason Collins, the center for the Washington Wizards, became, as he writes in his Sports Illustrated cover story, the first openly gay athlete playing in a major American team sport. He goes on to say in his story, quote, "I didn't set out to be the first openly gay athlete playing in a major American team sport, but since I am, I'm happy to start the conversation. I wish I wasn't the kid in the classroom raising his hand and saying I'm different. If I had my way, someone else would have already done this. Nobody has, which is why I'm raising my hand." And of course, we're having that conversation today with Kevin Blackistone, national sports columnist, and Shirley, Povich chair in sports journalism at the University of Maryland. Cleo Manago, founder and CEO of the Black Men's Xchange, and Earl, Fowlkes, president and CEO for the Center for Black Equity. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Is this really an issue of this is a gay male athlete? Is it really a question of can you perform, or is it really about his sexuality?
Well, it should be about can you perform, but let's be real. Black people, for example, have not talked about this issue. There has not been a rational, focused discussion on homosexuality in our community since we've been here. So what Jason's coming out, if you will, or coming into self-knowing could do is possibly inspire that conversation to occur, because supposedly he doesn't exist. And now we can't say he doesn't exist. So maybe the conversation could be advanced and finally happen, because in our community we have not done that.
It's pretty funny. You said have the conversation, and there was a lot of discussion this week. A lot of folks were ticked off with ESPN's Chris Broussard when they had a discussion on ESPN with LZ Granderson, who was openly gay sports writer, and Chris. Both of them are friends. They've had this discussion off air and had a discussion on air. There was a lot of criticism about Chris's position when it came to his religion. Charles Barkley also weighed in, and here was an interesting comment. He first of all talked about his support for Jason Collins, but he also said this as it related to having the discussion you're talking about, Cleo.
I think the one thing I want to come out this conversation, though, to be honest with you, is some people is not going to like this. I think they should have the right to express that. We should not crucify them. I disagree with them, and it's all right to disagree. But we live in this thing right now where anybody who comes out against it is going to be crucified, and I think that's unfair.
Now, the question is, can we have a discussion about this and folks actually disagree and not be, as Charles Barkley said, crucified?
Well, I think you can. And you saw that with LZ and with Chris, both of whom I know. Chris didn't attack Jason Collins. Chris basically said, I'm a man of faith. This is what I believe, and this is why I believe this is wrong. But he did not go out and attack Jason Collins. He embraced the idea. And so I think as long as it's couched in those terms, I think it's somewhat understandable. I mean, I think that's one of the sentiments that we have in this country.
But that's a mixed message. I mean, saying that God don't like you and God's really looking at you sideways, but I'll accept you anyway. It's not a fully accepting message.
Well, the interesting thing about Jason Collins is throughout his piece, and people talk about how courageous he is, he might need to check that, because throughout his piece, he's talking about thinking about having done this before, but being uncomfortable and not doing it.
That article was about his journey of coming out, and there are different steps in that journey. And so, you know, I can understand him saying, you know, 2003 I wasn't ready, because when for the LGBT community, the coming out process can be 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, the whole lifetime. So he had stepping stones. So, yeah, he wasn't ready to say what 98 meant, but he knew what it was. It was symbolic, and he can look back, and the article is about him looking back on the process of him coming out, how difficult it was. I think that's a story in itself.
It is a story, but my point is that the narrative has been about his courage. And to me, it would have been courageous once you're settled in as an NBA athlete, a long-time journeyman in the league, to then stand up before what happened to Tyler Clemente at Rutgers University, make a stand, and maybe you would have emboldened Tyler Clemente to deal with his life unlike he wound up doing.
The last question I got to ask you guys, and that's very simple. Is it fair to label him a hero? We've seen that thrown about back and forth. People say, wait a minute, is it a hero because you came and declared your sexuality? Are you a hero because you're going to take the criticism with it? And so your thoughts about this label of a hero?
Well, I think that depends on what he does next. Just because he's come out, I'm not necessarily consider that a hero. And the point I was going to make that's relevant to this, I think, is that who keeps on guiding how this discussion evolves. It's still not a black discussion regarding black people who have been affected by not being able to be who they are, same-gender loving people. And there's a whole discussion that's relevant to black life and culture that still keeps escaping the landscape in terms of discussion and focus.
I think he's a hero. You know why he's a hero? Because there are black athletes, men and women, who are in junior high school, who are gifted in sports. They're in high school and in college, and they're going to look in the mirror, and they'll be able to look at themselves and consider being the whole person when they're going out to play and being a whole person in society.
Give a final comment.
For me, it's not a heroic act, but I talked to a PhD student who I know who's studying these issues in the media as it relates to LGBT issues, and she gave me several anecdotes, not unlike those from you, suggesting that, you know what, he's a hero to a lot of people. Just maybe not to me.
All right. Jim, I'm going to cut you off right there, but for our audience, we're going to have the extended conversation on our website, tv1online.com. You can also go to RolandMartinReports.com and check it out as well. Kevin, Cleo, Earl, we certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure.
Up next.